Good evening and welcome to DS Radio, Domination Submission Radio. My name is Mike Makai, and I am your host with the most DS, BDSM, kink, and fetish talk on Blog Talk Radio. This is a call-in show this evening, so if you want to call in with your questions, your comments, rants, or raves, then call us. The number is 347-857-1862. Again, 347-857-1862. Just tell the call screener what you're calling in for, and we'll try to get you on the air. We do have a chat room. If you're interested in posing your question or making your comments via text, then check out the chat room at the bottom of your screen if you're listening to us live at Blog Talk Radio. I do believe you have to be registered and logged in with Blog Talk Radio with a free account in order to type in the chat room, but check it out. It's pretty easy to do. I'd like you to check out our website as well. The website address is domination-submission.com, and that's where you can find our Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and other social media in case you want to contact us or give us your thoughts on just about anything we have to talk about tonight. And I would also recommend that you check out my book. My book title is Domination Submission, the BDSM Relationship Handbook. It is on sale at Amazon, both in paperback and Kindle format. And yesterday, as my New Year's resolution, I started some serious work on Volume 2 of Domination Submission, all the stuff we forgot to put in the first book. So this is also your chance to have some sort of an impact on the next volume. So if you've got a topic that you think absolutely needs to be in that book, or you have a question that should be answered in that book, then by all means, contact me and let me know. So my co-host this evening is L.B. Shaw. L.B. Shaw is the author of the Trust in Me series of erotic fiction. She is about to release her new novel, Becoming Stone, which has a decidedly BDSM flavor to it. And she's got a really useful and refreshing perspective on the lifestyle, and that is the perspective of somebody just kind of feeling her way through it. And so that's one of the really valuable things about having LB on the show. How you doing, LB?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am good. You know what our topic is tonight?
I do. Did you know?
I do. I actually do, for once. Our topic tonight is feminism and BDSM. And we're going to answer the question, can you be a feminist and a submissive at the same time? What do you think, LB? Can you?
I think that you absolutely can be.
Are you a feminist, LB?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I just...
and you didn't prepare...
It's funny because to be honest with you, I probably never really considered myself to be a feminist, but I guess I am, and if I had to classify myself as a particular type of feminist, more of a liberal feminist as opposed to a radical or anything like that. But yes, I do support feminism, although I'm not actively involved in any politics that advocate, but I do support feminism, so I guess I would be able to call myself a feminist in that sense.
Well, I'm kind of like you. I consider myself a feminist. Now, yes, there are male feminists out there. I consider myself a feminist in the sense that I believe in equality for women, equal opportunity, not necessarily equal outcomes, but equal opportunity on the political scene for it. I don't believe that you achieve these things by marching up and down the street with a sign or burning your bra. I believe you achieve these things by simply being out there and doing the things that further the cause. And so
that's what liberal feminists do.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, just for our listeners, there are probably people out there who are very interested in what we're talking about this evening, but probably don't have a really good definition of feminism bouncing around in their head at the moment. Do you want to take a stab at that?
I sure will. I personally like to think of feminism as going beyond the notion that women are equal to men, but also that gender should not play a factor when deciding what rights people have or what they're capable of doing. So it's not about necessarily lifting women up to be equal with men. It's more about women should have never been forced down there to begin with. I like to think of it as just removing gender from the equation, period.
Mm-hmm. I do too. I really do. I don't believe that feminism should involve any policies that are similar to what we've seen with equal opportunity, for example. And not equal opportunity, it actually turns out to be unequal opportunities, because if you don't happen to be a member of certain minorities, you're not going to get a lot of different opportunities out there. And we've seen some of that sort of positive remedy type of political agendas in the last few decades, trying to fix the problems in society relative to gender. But one of the things that we have seen quite a bit of in recent years is this notion among many feminists and people who are sympathetic to the feminist cause that our lifestyle, the BDSM or DS lifestyle, is somehow anti-feminism. And in fact, one of the reasons we're talking about this tonight is because of something that happened to me just a couple of days ago. And it happens to me a lot, but this was recent, and consequently it was at the top of the mind when you called the other day and said, hey, what are we going to be doing for the show this week? And this is what happened. Some friends of mine and I were in a chat room having a discussion when somebody came in and quietly kind of started taking in the conversation. And at some point, somebody in the room mentioned my book, and this new person in the room asked, oh, you have a book? And so we sent her a link, and she went to Amazon and noticed that the book was Domination Submission, the BDSM Relationship Handbook. And her first reaction to that was, oh, you're one of those. And then she turned to everyone else in the room and said, and I suppose there are no feminists in this room as well, which, needless to say, set off a little bit of a shitstorm, I guess. We had a few people who vigorously disagreed with her, and we had one person, a friend of mine, who said, honey, I was burning my bra while you were still in diapers. And it was very interesting in the sense that this person has had the stereotypical view of the BDSM lifestyle as being exploitative, as being harmful to women, as being somehow misogynistic or hateful towards women. There were just so many misconceptions there, and the discussion was really very, very almost painful, in the sense that I can appreciate a discussion or an argument that has some logic to it, but there just really wasn't a whole lot of logic there. You know, when somebody tells me that BDSM is misogyny or the hatred of women, the first thing I say is, but I love women, so how do you explain that? Or how do you explain the fact that there's so many male submissives out there? If it's hatred of women, why do males want to be submissives? Explain that to me. Or the whole thing about, well, it's taking away the free will and the potential for women for self-realization, you know, and it's like nobody is making anybody do anything. So, yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and we're going to talk about those in the show. But I have an interesting little exercise here for you. I'm sure that you and I, LB, have heard some of these arguments before, and I'll bet you some of our listeners have heard some of these arguments before. But there are a lot of different arguments that people use against BDSM and the DS lifestyle in order to portray it as being harmful, as being exploitative. And I'm going to read some of these arguments to you. Keep in mind that as I do this, that what I have here on my notes, these are not really arguments against BDSM. These are arguments against something else. But these are the arguments being used by people in the political arena now to condemn BDSM. Number one, it can be used as a weapon against women. Number two, it's often connected with physical abuse and violence. Or this one, people are sometimes harmed doing it. Or this one, number four, it's awful when it's done non-consensually. Number five, there's a lot of jerks who do it. Number six, a lot of it is sexist, and it glamorizes unreal body expectations and body types. And number seven, it can be extremely traumatic to people who are exposed to it inappropriately. Now, that all sounds pretty reasonable when we're using it to condemn BDSM, doesn't it, LB?
It certainly could be, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's true. I mean, there are two sides to any of these arguments. Well, here's the kicker. I wasn't describing the arguments against BDSM. This is a list of arguments against sex. And the point I'm making here is that you can use these arguments to make anything look bad. I mean, I don't think anybody would stand out in front of anyone with a straight face and say sex is bad, everyone should just stop it, and it should be outlawed, you know, people should be put in jail for having sex. And yet, sex can be used as a weapon. It can be connected with abuse, and often is connected with abuse. Sometimes people are harmed while doing it. Sometimes it is done non-consensually, and it's really bad when that happens. You know, there are a lot of jerks who have sex. Well, yeah, there are a lot of jerks who do BDSM. There are a lot of jerks who, you know, ride bicycles. It doesn't make the bicycle bad or sex bad or BDSM bad. It makes the jerks bad. Sex is sexist. That's kind of why you call it sexist, I think. But and it does glamorize. I mean, you don't see a whole lot of sexy advertising with body types other than your runway model types. And, you know, obviously sex can be traumatic at the wrong time, in the wrong place, with the wrong person. And so, again, it just drives me crazy that people are using these very generic arguments, which could apply to anything, and using it as a way to somehow portray the DS and BDSM lifestyles as harmful and evil and misogynistic. Any thoughts on that, LB?
Yeah, I think it's just people are unfortunately misinformed about the lifestyle, and I don't even think of it, as far as being submissive as, as related to sex. But I'm sure that women are exploited by dominance. I mean, we're exploited by men all the time, but that's not a valid argument that BDSM is anti-feminist any more than it's an argument that BDSM is abuse. I mean, just because you have one rotten apple on a tree, you don't cut the whole tree down. I mean,
not all dominants are men either. Let's face it, there are an awful lot of dominatrix females out there as well. So for anyone to somehow frame this entire issue as male versus female, those people are obviously misinformed, since not all dominants are male and not all submissives are female, and it doesn't explain the people who aren't. Go on, I interrupted. What else were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to elaborate on, I think I was just going to make a comment on, I think most of us have been guilty at some point of making sexist jokes or comments like, women are emotional or women are crazy or all men are jerks, they just want a piece of ass or that sort of thing. We do have a tendency to categorize sexes based on our experiences and our observations. Now, I do believe that men and women are on the whole hardwired differently, just on a biochemical level. I mean, laboratory studies have shown that our brains make connections in physically different ways. Men tend to make connections from the front to the back, and women from one side, from the left side to the right side. So, but making the assumption that a woman who chooses to hand control over to her male dom, if we're talking about a female submissive and a male dominant, making that assumption that she is anti-feminist and perpetuating gender inequality is just as asinine as saying that a mother who chooses to work outside of the home doesn't care about her family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And somebody just made a very good point in the chat room, and this is proof that the stuff that you type in the chat room does get on the air. Somebody just said that the exploitation of women is fairly universal in the vanilla lifestyle as well. I mean, it's not something that is just unique to the fetish lifestyle. That the vanilla folk have been exploiting women ever since there have been women. And so I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense to be pointing fingers at our lifestyle and saying that it is somehow anti-feminist. In fact, I would love to see any documentation that shows that there is a greater degree of exploitation in this lifestyle. I believe there may be more opportunities, but I believe that it is in any way more pernicious or more common or even more serious in this lifestyle than it is outside of it. But I would love to see those statistics.
It would be interesting stats if you could somehow poll everyone who is involved in the BDSM lifestyle as opposed to vanilla lifestyle. It would be interesting to see the results because when it really comes down to it, I think if you're in a healthy relationship and surrounded by open-minded people who are generally supportive, like you said, you've got female submissives who can have female dominance. Males can be submissive with female doms. And when we accept that, we get into this whole idea of more of an acceptance of gender neutrality, which I believe feminism actually supports.
I really do, too. Now, I'm going to play something for you, and this is an excerpt from one of the news programs. I believe this is from Lou Dobbs, and it is a clip about what they term the failure of feminism. Now, I don't honestly believe that feminism has failed, but I do believe that it has caused some problems of its own. Just like anything, when you do something to solve one problem, you create other problems. And I believe that this has been the case with much of the feminist movement over the last 3 decades. But have a listen to this.
The feminist movement in this country promised women once that they could have it all: a successful career, financial success, and a family. But now, a controversial new study by the University of Pennsylvania suggests that women are less happy than men, despite all of the progress that women have made since the 1970s. Inez Foray has our report.
You've come a long way, baby.
Women have come a long way in the last 35 years, but despite a movement that brought so much progress to American women, their happiness has dropped relative to men over the last 3 decades.
The reason we find that surprising is that if you look across society, there's been a lot of social change that shifted things towards women.
The data was studied by 2 researchers at the University of Pennsylvania who say a happiness gender gap is emerging.
We look across age groups, across marital status, across labor force participation, across whether you have children or not, and we find that there's not a particular group of women who've become less happy, but rather all women across all of these categories have become less happy over time relative to men.
Now, this is really interesting because they looked at women across all different categories, age, income, what they did for a living, regional. I mean, they looked at all the different demographics of these women. But, of course, they didn't look at women who are vanilla versus women who are in the BDSM lifestyle, because I'll bet you, how much would you like to bet that women in the BDSM lifestyle have not suffered as much of a drop in the happiness factor as women in the vanilla lifestyle? I know you're just chomping at the bit to comment on this.
I don't know if I'm chomping at the bit to comment on that. I think it would definitely be interesting to see the results. But like I said, as long as it's a healthy relationship, I wouldn't doubt that you're wrong at all. I would be curious, though, and I don't know if she mentioned it or not, but are we comparing happiness now? Are we comparing results from, where women question on their happiness back in the 50s?
Yes. That's
I mean, is there any...
They have, every year they have taken women across various the spectrum of demographics and asked them basically rank your happiness. How happy are you on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 10 or something? And I guess they do it in different areas, as in, are you emotionally fulfilled? Are you challenged in working at your optimal level at work? And are you being paid as much as men? Those sorts of things. And what's interesting is that the feminist movement started about 35 years ago, and interestingly enough, the data shows that starting about 30 years ago, women started progressively becoming less and less happy. And the knee-jerk reaction would be to correlate the two. Well, the feminist movement started and now women are less happy, therefore the feminist movement is causing them to be less happy. I don't think it's that simple. But I do believe that there's a certain level of common sense there. As women became more and more thrust into the business of competing with men for jobs and for salaries and for status and for all of the perks of being dominant in society. For up until 35 years ago, men were essentially dominant in society. I mean, there's no question there. I often use the analogy that the 1950s household was a DS household. Men were the kings of their castle, and women were, in most ways, very submissive, and they spent most of their time just trying to make their partners happy. And obviously, not everyone is going to be thrilled with that way of life, and obviously that's what kind of spawned the feminist movement. But, I think there were a lot of women who, at that time, and even now, would much rather have just stayed home and not had to go out and find a career and find a job and compete for the status and the salary and position and all that sort of thing. So, it makes perfect sense to me that you had, 90% of women in America at one point didn't have to work. Now they have to work. How does that, it doesn't make everybody happy. There are a lot of people who just rather not work, don't you think?
I agree. I think we should first establish that correlation definitely does not mean cause-effect. But I agree that if women want to be treated as equal and they're given opportunities to be treated as equal, I don't think that it's necessarily true that just because they're generally more unhappy now that that's because of the feminist movement. I do think there's more of women face a lot of pressures that they didn't face years ago, and that it's a lot harder to make ends meet on a single person salary. And so my husband and I, he makes most of the money. I do make a little bit, but it's extremely hard, and he makes pretty good money. But, I also face pressures of having to do a lot of stuff around the house, and when I compare that to having to work a full-time job and coming home and still having to maintain a house, I would definitely say that I'm much happier with this, but I'm probably just rambling at this point. I think that women do face a lot more pressures today than they did 35, 40, 50 years ago. But I don't necessarily think that you could say that you got what you asked for, so maybe you didn't really want it.
I don't think it's that. I think that it's just a natural consequence of women moving from being housewives to having careers, and that's a very stressful thing.
Oh,
and
let's point out that women. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, let's also point out that women are making 76 cents to the man dollar, and that can be very, very frustrating to some women who feel like they're not getting compensated equal pay. I mean, you can also factor in if women haven't overall, and this is a broad, sweeping generalization, if women haven't been in the workforce as long as men, they don't have the tenure, they might not have the experience as much experience as their male counterparts, but still they are not receiving. They're not getting paid. We are not. I say they, like I'm not a woman, but we're not getting paid what men are.
Well, do those calculations factor in maternity leave? Because when men start getting that, then maybe it'll even out.
Well, men are taking paternity leave. My husband, when his son was born, he actually stayed home with the kid, and his ex-wife went right back to work, and he's actually worked with several men who are choosing to stay home with the little baby instead of mom. So there you go. There's another.
There's another factor. All right, let me just lay out how we're going to attack this. First of all, I'm going to remind everybody that this is a call-in show, so if you want to call in with your comments or your questions, the number is 347-857-1862. Again, 347-857-1862. Call in, give us your questions, make your comments, tell me where I'm wrong. And we will take those calls as soon as they come in, if we can work it out. We're also going to listen to a pre-recorded interview that I did with Little Red, our co-host, who couldn't be here tonight, but she definitely has some things to say on this, and so we pre-recorded some of her commentary, and we'll play that right after the break at the bottom of the hour. And we are going to answer we're going to try to answer several major questions. The question here is, does being happy as a submissive constitute a good argument that counters the charges by the feminists? In other words, if a feminist says you're wrong to be a submissive because you're perpetuating a misogynistic system, does the fact that you're happy factor into it at all? I mean, there are people who are going to say, well, there are people who are abused in their relationships, and they must be happy with it, or they wouldn't stay, or something. So we're going to talk about that. So happiness, and that's one reason we talked about this Lou Dobbs thing. Happiness, is that a factor or not? What about abuse? I mean, how do we draw the line? How do we distinguish abuse from DS or BDSM? We'll talk about some of those things. We'll talk about maybe the whole idea, and this is something that the woman that I spoke with a couple of days ago was just adamant about, and this was the idea, the notion that nobody should tell anybody else what to do. I personally find that kind of hilarious, but it was essentially the bedrock.
It was pretty intense.
It was the bedrock of her argument.
She has all the answers.
Yeah, it was kind
of interesting. She has all the answers.
She had all the answers. Well, obviously she had not been out in the world very much. I suspect that she was a young person. I'll just leave it at that. And in fact, at one point she said, well, if anyone tries to tell me what to do, I'll just kick him in the nuts. And I said, well, that makes you a dominant. Welcome to the lifestyle. So it was an interesting, very interesting conversation, and maybe we'll touch on some other points that came up during that conversation after the break. We're going to take a very quick musical break for about a minute and a half. You're listening to Domination Submission Radio. My name is Mike Makai, the author of Domination Submission, the BDSM Relationship Handbook, and my co-host is L.B. Shaw, the author of the Trust in Me series of erotic fiction, and we'll be back in about a minute and a half. my mic on. We're back. You're listening to DS Radio, and my name's Mike Makai. We're talking about feminism and BDSM. And there are a lot of people out there, I believe they're misinformed people, but there are a lot of people out there who believe that BDSM is exploitative and misogynistic and perpetuates the hatred and abuse of women. And so this is the topic that we're on tonight. We're going to address some of those concerns and maybe expose some of the myths that support those sorts of notions. Now, I'm going to play a pre-recorded interview that I did earlier with our other co-host, Little Red, who happens to be a personal friend of mine and a masochist extraordinaire. Now, you have to understand who Little Red is. Little Red is an Army veteran. She's an Amazon, crazy redhead. She's a foot taller than me. She scares the crap out of most guys. And any thought that she would put up with abuse or hatred of women, you would put that right out of your head if you had spent even 5 seconds in her presence. So I definitely wanted to get her take on this whole BDSM is abuse notion. And so this is the interview that I did with her previously. Red, I wanted to get your opinion on this because there are a lot of people out there who believe that you cannot be a submissive and be a feminist at the same time. Now, you happen to be an Army veteran. You happen to be a person who stands up for herself always. And basically anybody who says that you're a doormat, you'll probably kick their ass. You tell me, can you be a submissive and a feminist at the same time?
Absolutely. There's no reason why I can't be every bit of a woman and still take down a 7-foot man and crush him beneath my stiletto.
Mm-hmm.
No person on the face of the planet ever going to walk all over me, ever.
Mm-hmm. So what do you say to the people who say that BDSM or DS are exploitative of women? That's all about keeping a woman under a man's thumb. What do you say to those people?
I would say they are very much misinformed and completely off base because they have no fact behind it. There are some out there that do use this as a form of abuse, and those people I do not consider part of our lifestyle by any means because they do not have the respect and the understanding of what it actually means to honor the lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel any less of a person because you submit to your master? Do you feel that he is somehow better than you?
No. We both care of our families. We both have our own home. We both have separate lives other than the life we have intertwined with each other. He has his friends. I have my friends. But he doesn't place restrictions on me saying, oh, you can't go out with these people because I don't approve of them. My answer is, okay, I'm still going out for a beer. Have a nice night.
What do you say to the people who believe that letting somebody tell you what to do is somehow degrading or demeaning or makes you less of an independent woman than, say, the feminist down the street?
That feminist down the street still gets told to do at her job because everybody has a boss. The only difference is I choose to give some concessions to my dom because it makes me happy. It fulfills a need for him, but it also fulfills a need for me. I make grown men cry at work. So when I come home, the last thing I want to do is make a grown man cry. I want to be the girl that gets taken care of and puts pigtails on and little schoolgirl outfit and have a good time. Okay, that's great, but I don't have to fold his underwear in a certain way. He's never told me to do that. I just do it. I don't have to hang his shirts up in a particular order. I do it because I know it's convenient for him. There's nothing about our relationship that has ever been dictated that you will do, and we're perfectly okay with that.
How do you explain to people, well, okay, the people who think that somehow your power has been taken away from you rather than voluntarily given to somebody? I mean, are there people who assume that from your relationship, and how do you respond to that?
My mother was actually one when I came out and told her that I am involved in not only the BDSM lifestyle, but the DF lifestyle. And she had some grave misconceptions, and we sat down and talked all about it. And at the end of the discussion, she realized I have more power in my current relationship in the DF lifestyle than I did when I was in a vanilla relationship, because the guidelines that we have for each other, makes it more convenient for us because we know where our boundaries lie. Some vanilla relationships are so muddled and have no understanding of what their partner needs that life becomes complicated for them, and they argue and they fight and they don't know what to do for each other, and it ends up in a very messy divorce or a very bad breakup. With this, there's clear boundaries, so we know what our partner needs and we fulfill that need for them, and they fulfill that need for us.
Do you believe that somebody has to have power before they can give it up in a power exchange with their partner? And if so, how are you empowered by your relationship?
I don't think necessarily you need to be empowered to give it up. There are some people out there that are naturally submissive completely, and they do need someone to help guide them because they cannot make decisions on their own because it's not in their personality. And that's okay. For me, I am a very dominant personality. I am larger than life, and most of our listeners know that I am in no way, shape, or form afraid of my own shadow or afraid to say what is on my mind. So for me to be able to submit to someone is actually a great burden off my shoulders because I do take care of house and children and bills and our pets, and I'm a dominant figure at work. I work in a predominantly male-dominated field. So when I come home, the last thing I really want to do is be in charge 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
What about the people who believe, and this is kind of a follow-up to what you just said, what you're saying is that your submission provides you kind of a sense of freedom from having to be in charge all the time. What do you say to people who equate your submission to a form of slavery or bondage or oppression? You just said it's a form of freedom for you. What do you say to those people?
I would say you need to walk around in our shoes and be open-minded because we've done what you've done. We have absolutely lived the vanilla lifestyle and found it not to our taste, and that's okay. If you choose to be narrow-minded and bigoted, then by all means, please continue because you are going to have a very narrow view and you're going to go to your grave with that narrow-mindedness, and you're going to pass that along to other people and infect them with it. In the world we live in, we have to be open-minded. There's too many cultures, too many religions, too many viewpoints not to be. Because if we all took our narrow slice of the world and went, this is the way it has to be and everybody else is wrong, there would absolutely be no peace from house to house, let alone town to town, county to county, state to state, country to country. And it would be an absolute miserable world. I don't impose my views on anybody. If you choose to accept them, that's fine. We have something to talk about. If you don't, I'll talk about politics in the latest book I read.
What do you think of the feminist movement, the whole women need to get out from under the thumb of a male-dominated society and prove that they are at least equal, if not superior to men? What do you think of that whole movement anyway?
I think it's got a very good basis for it because we don't need to be the little housewives, you know, barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. We can just as well be power players on Wall Street. We can be CEOs. We can be presidents of companies. We can do the exact same job to a degree. Physicality does play a role in it, and I know some very physical women, and I also know some very effeminate men that can't do the job that I do. But the I am woman, hear me roar thing, you don't really need to scream in somebody's ear to have them realize that you can do the same job. Whether you get the atta girl pat on the shoulder or not, that's regardless. If you can look yourself in the eye at the end of the day and go, I did a good job, then you're golden. If you can look yourself in the eye and say, I put women back 50 years because I was a monstrous bitch and nobody likes me and everybody wishes there was no woman in charge of them, then you've got problems because you've got a bigger chip on your shoulder than just the feminist movement.
Do you see any contradiction at all between the fact that you're an Army veteran and a submissive?
Not at all, because I took orders as a soldier because that's what I had to do. I also gave orders as a soldier because I was in charge of other troops. It doesn't make me any less of a soldier because I take orders at home versus taking orders from my NCO or my commander.
Right. I think it's valuable to get your viewpoint on this. I'm glad we got you to pre-record this little interview so that we could slip you into the show, even though you are not able to be live with us tonight. So I really appreciate it.
I so wish I could be.
Well, we do too. If nothing else, just to hear the giggle every once in a while. That's what we keep you around for, the giggles. Thanks very much for calling in, Red. Take care.
No problem.
Bye-bye. So that was the interview that I did with Red. And obviously, you can hear her passion the passion in her voice for standing up for women's rights and not being anybody's doormat. And I pity the guy who tries to abuse or insult or demean or degrade Red, because she will literally crush that person under her heel. She's not somebody that you want to mess with. And, I think that this is valuable to portray or to at least demonstrate this to the folks out there who have the misconception that a woman or a man, whoever is a submissive, whoever happens to be a submissive, is a submissive because they have no other choice, or that they're submissive because they're self-loathing, or they're submissive because they like to be abused or something. I think this is such a terrible misconception and such a sad way of viewing not just our lifestyle, but I think it's a sad way of viewing the way the world works. I mean, there have been abusive people throughout history, and there are just as many abusive people in any lifestyle, including the vanilla lifestyle. And I think to use those people as a reason to bash ours, I think is disingenuous. It's dishonest, and it's just not right. So that's one of the things that I have been hoping to help to correct with my book and with this show and with some of you folks, and sending you out there to pass on some of this information and to fight some of these misconceptions. So, LB, what did you think of Red's interview?
Oh, there's just so many things to say. I love how she talked about crushing a man with a stiletto. That's a little scary. I think she brought up a lot of really good points, and again, I think I really believe that our culture, in many ways, still has a way of perpetuating these social inequalities based on gender. I mean, homophobes accuse homosexual men of not being real men, and some even make fun of men who are in traditionally feminine roles like nursing. We encourage our children to wear gender-appropriate outfits on Halloween. Some people call lesbians man-haters, and we have yet to see a female president. So I think until we eradicate this mindset, it will continue. I think those who misunderstand the lifestyle make assumptions that because a woman is female and she's letting her male dom make decisions for her, that she's perpetuating the notion that women are the weaker sex and he's misogynistic. I just think that's completely untrue. I believe that when a woman submits, gender should not factor into the equation at all. A submissive does not say that my dominant makes the decisions because he's a man and therefore more capable. She says that my dominant makes these decisions because I want him to. Perhaps the submissive knows that, and it makes, and it should. I mean, if happiness is going to play a factor, I'm sure there are times that submissives choose to be in a relationship where she lets her dominant make decisions and may not be happy for other reasons, but that doesn't mean that that BDSM or DS is anti-feminist because she's not happy anymore. Then I can say that marriage is wrong because I'm not happy in my marriage. I mean, it's just kind of, you can't make that connection. And I think I can't take the credit for this quote, but I remember hearing somewhere that it takes more strength to kneel than it does to stand. It takes more strength to hand over that power to your dom, whether it's a total power exchange or not. It doesn't make you weak, and I think that's true. It's done from a place of trust and knowing that your dominant will keep your best interest in mind and meet your needs.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great points. I agree with you 100% in the sense that there are still a lot of problems related to gender in society. Where I have a problem is when people try to point at my lifestyle and blame that for what's happening. We haven't had a female president, and BDSM is misogynistic, so therefore you're going to blame BDSM for the fact that we haven't had a female president. You see what I'm saying? The correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation. Just because two things happen to happen in sequence doesn't mean that one caused the other. And I just think that there's just a lot of faulty reasoning going on out there, and hopefully we can reverse some of that. Now, some of the things that Red mentioned, and I think bear a little bit more discussion, is this notion that somebody who is dominant is somehow better than somebody who is submissive. In other words, there are an awful lot of people who have this weird idea that if a woman is submissive and takes direction or guidance from her dominant, that this is wrong for equality reasons. It's like, well, what makes him think he's any better than her? How would you respond to that, LB?
Well, I don't think that having the authority to make decisions makes you better anyway. How does that make you a better person? I mean, we all have different personalities and we have different needs. If we all run around trying to make decisions, then nobody would ever be doing anything. We'd all be bossing everybody around and nobody would be doing anything. I mean, it's just not the way the world works. People, it's like Red said, she has to take orders from her boss at work. It's no different, and it was no different in the military. We have to take orders from someone. I think even Dr. Charlie Ferrer had mentioned from birth, we are somewhat, kind of in this DS dynamic because we're always in a situation where we are responsible for doing something or someone is holding us accountable for doing something, and that's just the way the world works. Doesn't mean that you're better because you're giving orders.
Now, we did get a question in the chat room, and this is from Anna, who asks, so what is the power that the sub is exchanging? And this is a reference to TPE, or Total Power Exchange, and this is something I talked about in the book as well. I think, first of all, the idea that anyone's power can be taken away from them, and this is the notion that some of these feminists put forward, is that, you're taking away a woman's choices, you're taking away her power, you're making her powerless and a slave and exploited and that sort of thing. And, it's such a dangerous way to think because, first of all, everything hinges on consent in this lifestyle. And truth, there are people in abusive relationships who consent to that abusive relationship, even if it's harmful and painful and violent. And there are women, and this is any counselor, a marriage counselor will tell you this, there are lots of women who have been in abusive relationships, vanilla abusive relationships, by the way, who are taken out of the home and they go right back to their abuser. All right, now if that's not a sign of it being consensual, I don't know what is. And yet, you don't see people pointing to that and condemning marriage or vanilla sex for any of that. They want to point at the fetish lifestyle and BDSM as being causative of that sort of thing. But the bottom line is that you got to have power before you can give it up to somebody. Nobody lays there like a doormat and says, hey, just any dominant who happens to be passing by, just kind of grab me by the hair, drag me to your house and abuse me. I mean, that's just not the way it works. You got to have, if nothing else, the submissive has the ultimate choice of whether to accept a dominant or not. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I was going to actually point that out, that I do think that you need to have the power, and I was trying to think of a good analogy. I guess it's kind of like giving someone permission to drive your car if you don't have the keys. I mean, it's like a consent. I mean, having that power is your consent, and you're giving your consent to your dominant to make decisions. And also, there's such a wide range of, every relationship is different. I think people perceive that the DS dynamic is, the woman comes home and she's told what to do from the moment she walks through the door until she goes to bed, and I just don't think that all relationships are like that. There are negotiations, and I think that if you're in a relationship where you're not pleased with the power exchange, then you get out just like you would in a vanilla relationship. It's no different. You just choose how much power you are willing to give.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? It's not like a submissive is incapable of remembering how to say no. There are, a lot of things to consider when you do that, but the fact is there's always consent. And even when couples are practicing consensual non-consent, the reality is there's always the opportunity to walk away and say no. And in fact, as Red said, it's much more structured and much more forgiving of that sort of thing in our lifestyle than it is out there in the vanilla world. Because out there in the vanilla world, there are no rules, really. I mean, what is the protocol for breaking up in the vanilla world? Well, there isn't one. There's a million different ways to do it, and sometimes it involves, people beating each other over the head with 2x4s or shooting each other or something. But in the BDSM lifestyle, there are sort of mutually agreed upon rules for how those relationships end. And usually, at the most basic level, it ends with a release from a collar. But asking for release and those sorts of things are all very common protocols that are pretty well known in the lifestyle. It's not as cut and dry, not as black and white out there in the vanilla world. So Red made a very good point there. And one of the other things I wanted to address in this power exchange is that, there is a lot of power given to a submissive in power exchange. People don't think about it very much. They think only of the power that a submissive gives to the dominant. They don't think at all about what is the submissive getting out of this agreement. And I do write about that quite a bit in my book, and in fact, kind of at the front of the book, talking about how a submissive is empowered by a healthy DS relationship. And I started this section of the book by asking some of my former submissives, who I happen to be on very good terms with, most of them, and I asked them, when you were with me, how did I empower you? And I was really, frankly, surprised by some of the answers that I got back. One of the answers I got back was, you empowered me by forcing me to be independent, even when I wanted nothing more than for you to handle everything for me. And you empowered me by directing me to carry out tasks that I would normally have avoided doing. And you taught me that I'm smarter and stronger and more resourceful than I thought I was prior to that. And I got to tell you, that response kind of blew me away, because nobody really thinks of a submissive as somebody who is forced by her dominant to know that she's smarter and stronger and better and more resourceful than she ever thought possible. Because, sometimes everyone thinks about being pushed as a submissive in terms of being pushed to try new kinky things. Well, no. Sometimes it's being pushed to go to school, or sometimes it's being pushed to stop self-destructive habits, or sometimes it's being pushed to get your finances in order. I mean, there are lots of pushes out there, and they're not all about kink. So that's empowering a submissive, right? Wouldn't you say, LB?
I absolutely agree, and I was going to comment on something that Red had said about there's a lot of freedom in her submission, and I think that's a really great point too. But what you said is also great. I remember reading that part of your book, and there were a lot of really great comments from your former submissives, and I think that's true, that it's not just about handing over the power for your dominant to make decisions, but that they help you to be, maybe not to be a better person. I don't know if that's, some people might say they become a better person, but some submissives like myself, I have a hard time making decisions sometimes, and I don't want to do that. But a good dominant might help me to make better decisions and to be more independent in that sense, and that's a really good thing. That's the whole point.
Mm-hmm. And that is a source of power, too. Think of it this way. I mean, just in your mind, conjure up the image of a very powerful and wealthy individual. And when you go to that individual, you say something like, "Hey, what are we having for lunch?" And he says, I leave that to my people to take care of. They'll get lunch for us." Or, "Hey, we should be in Cincinnati on Tuesday." And he says, "I'll have my people get us some tickets or something." When you see that vision in your head, having other people do things for you, it seems like a very powerful thing, doesn't it? I mean, this is a powerful guy who has people make appointments for him and cook for him and do all this sort of thing. And yet, he has let go of those responsibilities. Are you following me? I mean, he doesn't worry about making the appointment. He doesn't worry about cooking dinner. He doesn't worry. He has let go of those responsibilities. He lets somebody else handle it, make those decisions. And so we're kind of programmed to think that, he's a very powerful man. He has all these people doing things for him. Well, no. He has surrendered having to do those things for himself. He's letting somebody else handle those things. And so one of the responses I got back from a former sub was, "You empowered me with the power to let go." Because prior to then, she would just be worried sick about how to handle things and how to solve things and how to fix problems and make things happen. And after the relationship, she was able to just let go of it and trust that I would do what was in her best interest. Now, is that being degraded or being somehow demeaned, or is that having enough power that you have somebody else handle things for you? You see what I'm saying?
It's absolutely a positive thing.
Yeah. If Donald Trump is powerful because he has other people do things for him, then why isn't a submissive powerful because she has a dominant doing things for her?
Exactly. That's a great analogy. I don't think I'd add anything to that.
Well, there are quite a few, and if you're interested, it's in my book. I guess it's on page 51, 52. It's several different ways that a submissive is empowered by her dominant, and I was surprised by them, because this has been a question that has dogged me for years, and people talk about total power exchange, and people would say, well, what is the submissive? Where's the power going from the dominant to the submissive? And there really is a lot. And when you think about it, and from these answers I got back while I was writing the book, I was just flabbergasted. You know, the power of self-confidence and the sure knowledge of being loved and cherished, you know, the power of being trusted with the dominant's flaws and weaknesses and secrets and that sort of thing, the being empowered with the authority to act and speak for the dominant, the empowerment that comes from synergy and being a catalyst for your partner. I mean, that works both ways, obviously, and that's a real good example of the give and take and the power exchange there. And you know, of course, you know, there's a great deal of power just in making a difference in your partner's life. And so a submissive may seem to outsiders as if she's a doormat or something like that, but you know, to that dominant, obviously there's something there that makes that submissive valuable and making a difference in his life too. And that's a certain type of power that you just can't see from the outside. So any thoughts of your own on this, LB?
Yeah, that women as a whole should be able to do those things on their own. But again, I keep going back to removing gender from the equation.
I think this has been a very interesting topic of discussion. I think we may come back to this again and again in future shows, and we definitely wish we had more time, but we are at the end of our hour, so I want to thank everyone for listening. This has been Domination and Submission Radio with Mike Makai and LB Shaw, and a pre-recorded clip from Lil Red, our other co-host. I want to thank you all for listening and invite you back next week. Take care. Bye-bye.